The morning sun cast long shadows across the Norfolk Naval Base as Captain Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his Navy SEAL Trident pin one final time before entering the briefing room. The brass gleamed against his dress blue uniform, each ribbon and medal telling a story of missions completed in the darkest corners of the world. Rodriguez had earned his reputation through 15 years of exemplary service, leading elite teams through operations that would never see the light of day in official records. As he pushed through the heavy oak doors, Rodriguez expected another routine inter-service coordination meeting. The room buzzed with the familiar mix of Navy, Army, Marine, and Air Force personnel, all wearing their dress uniforms for what promised to be another tedious discussion about joint operations protocols. Coffee cups clinked against saucers as officers shuffled papers and checked their watches, eager to return to more pressing duties. Rodriguez's eyes swept the room, cataloging faces both familiar and new. Admiral Thompson sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his weathered features betraying decades of naval service. Colonel Martinez from the Marines nodded respectfully as their eyes met, a gesture Rodriguez returned with practiced military courtesy. Major Stevens from the Army Special Forces offered a slight smile, remembering their collaboration during a classified operation in Afghanistan 3 years prior. But it was the figure seated near the back corner that caught Rodriguez's attention and held it. A woman in Air Force dress blues sat quietly, her posture impeccably straight, hands folded neatly on the table before her. What immediately drew Rodriguez's gaze, however, was not her composed demeanor or professional appearance, but rather the small golden badge adorning her left breast pocket. The badge itself was unremarkable in size, no larger than a silver dollar, but its intricate design spoke of something significant. A golden dragon, wings spread wide, clutched what appeared to be lightning bolts in its talons. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with each scale on the dragon's body carefully etched in microscopic detail. The badge seemed to catch and reflect the fluorescent lighting in a way that made it appear almost alive, as if the dragon might take flight at any moment. Rodriguez found himself squinting slightly, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. In his years of military service, he had encountered virtually every military decoration, badge, and insignia imaginable. He could identify Marine Scout sniper badges from across a room, distinguish between various Special Forces qualification tabs, and recognize foreign military decorations from allied nations. Yet this particular badge was completely foreign to him. As someone who prided himself on military knowledge and protocol, Rodriguez felt a twinge of irritation at encountering something he could not immediately classify. Was this some new Air Force qualification he had missed in the latest military publications? Perhaps a foreign decoration earned through exchange programs? The possibility that his encyclopedic knowledge of military insignia might have a gap bothered him more than he cared to admit. The woman wearing the badge appeared to be in her early 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun that revealed sharp, intelligent eyes. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed to perfection, with each ribbon and medal positioned with mathematical precision. Everything about her presentation screamed professionalism and attention to detail. Yet despite her obvious competence, Rodriguez found his attention continually drawn back to that mysterious golden dragon. Admiral Thompson called the meeting to order, and the room gradually settled into the familiar rhythm of military briefings. As various officers presented reports on joint training exercises, logistics coordination, and operational readiness, Rodriguez found his concentration wavering. His eyes kept drifting back to the Air Force officer and her enigmatic badge, his mind working through possibilities like a computer running through databases. During a brief recess, Rodriguez decided to satisfy his curiosity. Military protocol demanded that he approach the matter with appropriate respect and professionalism, but his investigative instincts as a SEAL team leader pushed him forward. He had spent years learning to read people, to identify potential threats and allies in hostile environments. This skill served him well in military settings, where understanding the capabilities and backgrounds of fellow service members could mean the difference between mission success and failure. Rodriguez approached the Air Force officer with what he considered his most professional demeanor. "Excuse me, Lieutenant," he began, noting the silver bars on her shoulders that indicated her rank. "Captain Rodriguez, Navy SEALs. I couldn't help but notice your badge there. I pride myself on knowing military decorations, but I have to admit, that one has me stumped." The lieutenant looked up from the documents she had been reviewing, her expression neutral and polite. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Air Force," she replied, extending her hand in a firm handshake. "It's not something you'd encounter very often in Navy circles, Captain." Rodriguez studied her face, looking for any hint of what the badge might represent. Chen's expression remained professionally pleasant, but there was something in her eyes, not arrogance, but perhaps a quiet confidence that suggested she was accustomed to questions about her unusual decoration. "Well, now you've got my curiosity piqued," Rodriguez continued, allowing a slight smile to play across his features. "Is it some kind of Air Force Special Operations qualification? Foreign decoration? I have to say, the dragon design is quite impressive." Chen glanced down at the badge briefly, then met Rodriguez's gaze again. "It's a specialized qualification, Captain. Let's just say it represents some unique training and experience." The vague response only heightened Rodriguez's interest. In his experience, legitimate military decorations came with clear explanations and proud stories of how they were earned. The evasiveness suggested either classification issues or, more troubling to Rodriguez's suspicious nature, something that might not be entirely legitimate. "Unique training," Rodriguez repeated slowly, his tone taking on a slightly more serious edge. "In the special operations community, we're usually pretty aware of each other's qualifications and capabilities. Especially anything that warrants such distinctive recognition." Chen's expression didn't change, but Rodriguez caught what might have been the slightest tightening around her eyes. "The Air Force has many specialized programs, Captain. Not all of them intersect with Navy special operations." As the meeting reconvened, Rodriguez returned to his seat with more questions than answers. Throughout the remainder of the briefing, he found himself studying Chen more carefully, looking for additional clues about her background and the mysterious badge. Her contributions to the discussion were minimal but knowledgeable, suggesting familiarity with joint operations and multi-service coordination. When the meeting concluded and officers began filing out, Rodriguez made a decision that would prove significant. Instead of letting the matter drop, he decided to pursue his investigation through unofficial channels. His years in special operations had taught him the value of thorough intelligence gathering, and something about this situation triggered his professional instincts. Rodriguez approached Colonel Martinez as they walked toward the exit. "Hey, Mike," he said in a low voice, "you know anything about that Air Force lieutenant? The one with the dragon badge?" Colonel Martinez glanced back toward Chen, who was gathering her materials. "Chen? Can't say I know much about her personally. She's been showing up at these joint meetings for the past few months. Always professional, seems to know her stuff." "Why?" "That badge she's wearing," Rodriguez explained, "I can't place it. And, when I asked her about it, she was pretty vague. You know how it is in our line of work, we usually know each other's credentials." Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Could be classified, could be something new the Air Force is developing. Or," he paused with a slight grin, "could be she just doesn't feel like explaining herself to curious Navy types." As they walked through the base, Rodriguez's mind continued working through possibilities. In the world of special operations, reputation and credibility were everything. Unauthorized or fabricated decorations were not just against regulations, they were considered among the worst possible breaches of military honor. The thought that someone might be wearing an illegitimate badge in his presence aided Rodriguez's sense of order and justice. That evening, Rodriguez sat in his quarters reviewing the day's events. The Golden Dragon badge had bothered him throughout the afternoon, like a puzzle piece that refused to fit properly. He considered various approaches for learning more about Lieutenant Chen and her mysterious qualification. Military databases, informal networks among special operations personnel, even reaching out to Air Force contacts, all options carried both potential benefits and risks. As he prepared for sleep, Rodriguez made a mental note to pursue the matter further. His instincts told him there was more to Lieutenant Chen than met the eye, and years of successful missions had taught him to trust those instincts. What he didn't anticipate was how dramatically his investigation would challenge his assumptions and, ultimately lead to one of the most humbling experiences of his military career. The Golden Dragon badge, gleaming innocuously on Lieutenant Chen's uniform, represented something far more significant than Rodriguez could have imagined. His decision to investigate further would set in motion a series of revelations that would not only answer his questions about the mysterious decoration but also force him to confront his own preconceptions about military service, achievement, and the true meaning of heroism. Little did Captain Rodriguez know that his casual inquiry about a seemingly unknown military badge would soon lead him face to face with a story of courage, sacrifice, and service that would leave him speechless and forever change his perspective on what it truly meant to serve with distinction. The investigation began the next morning with Rodriguez's typical methodical approach. After his morning PT session, he settled into his office and opened his laptop, beginning what he expected would be a straightforward search through military personnel databases. His security clearance granted him access to most service records, and he felt confident that a few strategic queries would reveal the truth about Lieutenant Chen and her mysterious badge. Rodriguez started with the standard Air Force personnel directory, entering Chen's name and rank into the search parameters. The results that appeared on his screen were surprisingly limited. Basic service information confirmed her current assignment to Joint Operations Coordination, but her previous duty stations were listed only in general terms. No detailed deployment history, no specific unit assignments, no comprehensive list of training completed or decorations earned. This level of information restriction immediately raised red flags for Rodriguez. In his experience, such limited personnel records typically indicated either very recent service entry or, more significantly, classification levels that restricted access to operational details. For someone wearing what appeared to be a specialized qualification badge, the latter seemed more likely. Undeterred, Rodriguez expanded his search to include unofficial networks within the Special Operations community. He reached out to contacts in Air Force Special Operations Command, hoping someone might recognize either Chen's name or be familiar with dragon-themed decorations. The responses he received were uniformly unhelpful, polite acknowledgments of his inquiry followed by statements that they had no information to share. By midday, Rodriguez's investigation had hit multiple dead ends, and his frustration was beginning to show. Major Stevens, passing by Rodriguez's office, noticed the captain's intense focus on his computer screen and decided to investigate. "Working on something interesting, Marcus?" Stevens asked, settling into the chair across from Rodriguez's desk. Rodriguez leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Remember that Air Force lieutenant from yesterday's meeting? The one with the dragon badge? I've been trying to find out what that decoration represents, and I'm hitting walls everywhere I look." Stevens raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. Information about military decorations is typically pretty accessible, especially for someone with your clearance level." "Exactly what I was thinking," Rodriguez agreed. "Either this badge represents something so new it hasn't been entered into the databases yet, or it's classified at levels above my access. But here's the thing that really bugs me: if it's legitimate and that classified, why wear it to a routine inter-service meeting?" The question hung in the air between them. In the Special Operations community, discretion about classified activities was paramount. Personnel with access to the most sensitive programs typically went to great lengths to avoid drawing attention to their involvement. "There is another possibility," Stevens said carefully. "Maybe the badge isn't what you think it is." Rodriguez's expression darkened. "That's what I'm starting to worry about. In 15 years of service, I've seen my share of people trying to enhance their military image with unauthorized decorations. It's always bothered me more than it probably should." Stevens nodded understandingly. The military community maintained strict standards regarding the wearing of decorations, and violations were considered serious breaches of military honor. "So what's your next move?" "I'm thinking about approaching this more directly," Rodriguez replied. "Maybe it's time for a more frank conversation with Lieutenant Chen herself." The opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. That afternoon, Rodriguez encountered Chen in the base commissary during lunch. She was standing in line at the deli counter, reading something on her mobile device while waiting to order. Rodriguez approached with what he hoped appeared to be casual friendliness. "Lieutenant Chen," he called out, causing her to look up from her phone. "Mind if I join you for lunch?" Chen's expression remained neutral, but Rodriguez detected a slight wariness in her eyes. "Of course, Captain." though I should mention I don't have much time today. They found a table near the commissary's large windows, the afternoon sun streaming across the cafeteria filled with personnel from various services. Rodriguez decided to adopt a more direct approach than his previous day's casual inquiry. "I'll be honest with you, Lieutenant," he began after they had settled with their meals. "Yesterday you mentioned that your badge represents specialized training, but I've been unable to find any information about it through normal channels. In my experience, that's unusual." Chen took a deliberate bite of her sandwich, chewing slowly before responding. "As I mentioned yesterday, Captain, not all Air Force programs intersect with Navy special operations. There are many specialized qualifications that don't appear in general databases." Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more serious. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. In the special operations community, we take military decorations very seriously. When someone wears a badge that no one can identify or verify, it raises questions about authenticity." The statement hung between them like a challenge. Chen set down her sandwich and met Rodriguez's gaze directly, her expression shifting from neutral politeness to something more guarded. "Captain Rodriguez," she said evenly, "are you questioning the legitimacy of my decorations?" "I'm questioning what I can't verify," Rodriguez replied. "It's nothing personal, it's about maintaining the integrity of military awards and recognition." Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Rodriguez's face with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a controlled tension. "Captain, I understand your concern about military integrity. It's actually something I share quite strongly. However, I'm not in a position to provide you with the verification you're seeking through normal channels." "And why is that?" Rodriguez pressed. "Because the program that badge represents operates under security classifications that prevent casual information sharing, even among fellow service members." Rodriguez felt his skepticism growing. "If it's that classified, why wear it openly?" "Because," Chen replied with the slightest edge to her voice, "I earned it, and military regulations allow for the wearing of earned decorations in appropriate settings." The conversation was heading toward confrontation, and Rodriguez realized he needed to either escalate or retreat. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and everything about this interaction reinforced his suspicion that something wasn't right about Chen's badge. "Lieutenant," he said, adopting what he hoped was a reasonable tone, "I'm not trying to be difficult here. But surely you can understand how this appears from my perspective. An unidentifiable decoration, vague explanations about specialized training, and claims of classification levels that prevent normal verification." Chen's composure remained intact, but Rodriguez noticed a subtle change in her posture, a straightening of shoulders that suggested she was preparing for something. "Captain Rodriguez," she said quietly, "I'm going to ask you directly, are you formally challenging the authenticity of my military decorations?" The question caught Rodriguez off guard. A formal challenge to military decorations was a serious matter that could trigger official investigations and, potentially serious consequences for both parties involved. He hadn't intended to escalate the situation to that level, but he also couldn't shake his conviction that something wasn't right. "I'm expressing concerns that I believe warrant clarification," he replied carefully. Chen nodded slowly, as if reaching some internal decision. "Very well, Captain. Since you're unwilling to accept my explanations and seem determined to pursue this matter, I'll make arrangements for you to receive the clarification you're seeking." "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind that will provide you with complete verification of my decorations and qualifications," Chen replied, gathering her things. "I'll contact you within 24 hours with details." As she prepared to leave, Chen paused and looked back at Rodriguez. "Captain, I want you to understand something. I don't blame you for your suspicions. In your position, I might have similar concerns. However, I think you'll find that the truth about my service record is quite different from what you're imagining." After Chen departed, Rodriguez remained at the table, replaying the conversation in his mind. Something about her final statement bothered him, not defensiveness or anger, but rather a quiet confidence that suggested she was completely comfortable with his investigation proceeding. That evening, Rodriguez discussed the day's events with his wife over dinner. Maria Rodriguez had been a military spouse for over a decade and had developed her own insights into military culture and personalities. "Marcus," she said after listening to his account, "doesn't it seem odd to you that she's actually encouraging your investigation rather than trying to discourage it?" "What do you mean?" "Well, if someone was wearing a fake decoration, wouldn't they try to avoid scrutiny? From what you're describing, she's actually facilitating further investigation." Rodriguez considered this perspective. "Maybe she's just very good at bluffing." Maria shook her head. "Or maybe there's more to this story than you're seeing." That night, Rodriguez found himself unable to sleep, his mind churning through the possibilities. His investigation had begun as a simple matter of professional curiosity but had evolved into something more significant. The thought that he might be wrong about Chen's badge, and, by extension, about his ability to read military situations accurately, was deeply unsettling. 24 hours later, Rodriguez received the call that would begin to unravel all his assumptions about Lieutenant Sarah Chen and her Golden Dragon badge. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Admiral Patricia Walsh, Director of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, requesting Rodriguez's presence for a classified briefing that afternoon. As Rodriguez hung up the phone, he realized that his investigation into a simple military decoration had somehow escalated to the highest levels of military command. Whatever the truth about Lieutenant Chen's badge, he was about to learn that his assumptions about military service, heroism, and the nature of classified operations were fundamentally incomplete. The Pentagon briefing room was located in a section Rodriguez had never accessed before, requiring multiple security checks and escort protocols that indicated the highest levels of classification. As he followed his military escort through corridors lined with portraits of military leaders, Rodriguez felt his confidence in his investigation beginning to waver. The level of security required to reach this meeting suggested involvement in programs far beyond anything he had previously encountered. Admiral Walsh was waiting in a secure conference room, her expression professional but carrying an undercurrent of something Rodriguez couldn't quite identify. Accompanying her was a civilian in an expensive suit who was introduced only as Mr. Davidson from the Department of Defense. The formal atmosphere immediately told Rodriguez that this was no routine clarification meeting. "Captain Rodriguez," Admiral Walsh began after he had taken his seat, "Lieutenant Chen informed us that you have concerns about the authenticity of certain military decorations she wears. Is this correct?" Rodriguez felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Yes, Admiral. I encountered a decoration I couldn't identify and became concerned when my inquiries through normal channels yielded no information." "And you felt it appropriate to challenge a fellow officer's decorations based solely on your inability to identify them?" The question was delivered without overt criticism, but Rodriguez recognized the implicit rebuke. "Admiral, in my experience with special operations, we typically have awareness of each other's qualifications. When I encountered something completely unfamiliar, accompanied by vague explanations, I felt obligated to investigate." Admiral Walsh nodded slowly. "Captain, I'm going to share some information with you that will require you to sign additional security agreements. Before we proceed, I need to know if you're prepared to receive classified information that may change your understanding of this situation." Rodriguez's throat felt dry, but he managed to respond affirmatively. The documents placed before him contained security classifications he had never seen before, indicating programs so deeply classified that their very existence was compartmentalized beyond normal special operations levels. After completing the paperwork, Admiral Walsh activated a secure presentation system. "Captain, what I'm about to show you represents one of the most classified programs in the United States military. The Golden Dragon qualification is awarded to personnel who have completed training and operations under Project Celestial Guardian." The screen displayed an organizational chart that made Rodriguez's breath catch. Project Celestial Guardian was described as a joint service program developing capabilities for what the documentation euphemistically termed unconventional operational environments. As Rodriguez read further, he began to understand that these unconventional environments referred to situations involving threats that existed outside normal military planning parameters. "The Golden Dragon badge," Mr. Davidson continued, "represents completion of training programs that prepare military personnel for encounters with phenomena that don't fit conventional threat assessments. Lieutenant Chen is one of only 47 personnel worldwide who have earned this qualification. Rodriguez felt his worldview shifting as he processed this information. What kind of phenomena? Admiral Walsh exchanged a glance with Davidson before responding. Captain, there are situations that military forces occasionally encounter that require specialized response protocols. Project Celestial Guardian trains personnel to handle these situations while maintaining operational security and public confidence in military capabilities. The briefing continued with information that challenged everything Rodriguez thought he knew about military operations. Lieutenant Chen, he learned, had been selected for Project Celestial Guardian after demonstrating exceptional performance in both Air Force intelligence and special operations training. Her service record, which had appeared frustratingly limited in standard databases, actually contained deployments to situations that existed in a classified realm beyond conventional military recognition. Lieutenant Chen's most significant deployment, Admiral Walsh explained, occurred 18 months ago during an incident in the Pacific that required immediate response from Celestial Guardian personnel. Her actions during that operation not only prevented a potentially catastrophic situation but also provided intelligence that led to significant advances in our understanding of unconventional threats. Rodriguez found himself struggling to process the implications of what he was hearing. Admiral, with respect, this sounds like something from science fiction. Captain, Mr. Davidson interjected, the military has always faced the challenge of preparing for threats that don't fit conventional models. Project Celestial Guardian simply extends that preparation into areas that most personnel never encounter. The briefing materials included heavily redacted reports detailing Lieutenant Chen's service record. What Rodriguez could read painted a picture of someone whose military experience far exceeded what her apparent age and rank would suggest. Multiple deployments to locations that weren't identified by name, training completions that referenced capabilities Rodriguez had never heard of, and commendations from officials whose titles suggested involvement in programs he couldn't imagine. The incident in the Pacific, Admiral Walsh continued, involved a situation that threatened multiple civilian vessels and could have resulted in significant loss of life. Lieutenant Chen was part of a 3-person team deployed to address the threat. Due to equipment failures and communication breakdowns, she found herself operating alone for over 6 hours in conditions that would have been considered impossible by conventional military standards. Rodriguez leaned forward, his professional interest overriding his skepticism. What kind of conditions? The kind that require specialized training to survive, let alone complete mission objectives, Davidson replied. Lieutenant Chen not only survived but also successfully neutralized the threat and extracted critical intelligence that prevented similar incidents. As the briefing progressed, Rodriguez began to understand that his investigation into Lieutenant Chen's badge had inadvertently led him into contact with military capabilities he had never imagined existed. The Golden Dragon qualification represented not just specialized training but also operational experience in situations that existed beyond the scope of conventional military doctrine. Captain, Admiral Walsh said as the formal presentation concluded, I want you to understand that Lieutenant Chen could have easily avoided this situation. She could have provided you with cover stories or deflected your inquiries through various means. Instead, she chose to allow this investigation to proceed because she believed you deserved to understand the truth about her service. Rodriguez felt a growing sense of embarrassment about his assumptions. Why would she take that risk? Because, Davidson answered, personnel who earn the Golden Dragon qualification are trained to value truth and transparency, even when it creates complications. Lieutenant Chen recognized that your concerns came from legitimate military values, and she chose to address them appropriately rather than simply dismissing them. The meeting concluded with Rodriguez signing additional security agreements and receiving briefing materials that would allow him to understand the broader context of Project Celestial Guardian. As he prepared to leave, Admiral Walsh made a final statement that would stay with him for years to come. Captain, Lieutenant Chen's service record includes actions that would qualify for our nation's highest military decorations if they could be publicly acknowledged. The Golden Dragon badge represents not just specialized training but also service under conditions that most military personnel could never imagine. When you questioned its authenticity, you were unknowingly challenging the recognition of some of the most extraordinary military service in recent history. As Rodriguez left the Pentagon that afternoon, his mind reeled with the implications of what he had learned. His simple investigation into an unrecognized military decoration had led him face to face with military capabilities and service records that existed in a classified realm far beyond his previous experience. The drive back to Norfolk provided time for reflection on how dramatically his assumptions had been challenged. Lieutenant Chen, whom he had suspected of wearing unauthorized decorations, was actually one of the most highly qualified military personnel he had ever encountered. Her apparent evasiveness about her badge had been appropriate operational security for programs so classified that their existence was compartmentalized beyond normal special operations levels. That evening, Rodriguez found himself reviewing the limited materials he had been cleared to retain from the briefing. The more he read about Project Celestial Guardian and the Golden Dragon qualification, the more he understood that his encounter with Lieutenant Chen represented a collision between conventional military thinking and capabilities that existed beyond normal operational parameters. The Golden Dragon badge, which had seemed like a simple decoration of questionable authenticity, actually represented training and operational experience that few military personnel would ever approach. Lieutenant Chen's service record included situations that challenged the boundaries of what Rodriguez had believed possible in military operations. As he prepared for sleep, Rodriguez realized that his investigation had taught him as much about his own limitations as it had about Lieutenant Chen's qualifications. His assumption that he could identify and verify any legitimate military decoration had been based on an incomplete understanding of the full scope of military capabilities and service opportunities. The next day would bring the opportunity for Rodriguez to face Lieutenant Chen again, armed with a completely transformed understanding of her service and qualifications. How he handled that encounter would determine whether his investigation into her badge would end with professional growth or personal embarrassment. The next morning brought another inter-service coordination meeting, and Rodriguez found himself approaching the familiar briefing room with an entirely different perspective than just days earlier. As he entered, his eyes immediately sought out Lieutenant Chen, who was seated in the same location as their previous encounters. However, where he had once seen someone whose credentials he questioned, he now recognized a military professional whose service record far exceeded his own in both scope and significance. Chen acknowledged his presence with a professional nod, her expression giving no indication of the dramatic events that had unfolded since their last conversation. Rodriguez took his usual seat, acutely aware that he owed her both an apology and an explanation, yet uncertain how to approach such a delicate situation in a public setting. Throughout the morning's presentations, Rodriguez found his attention divided between the official proceedings and his growing awareness of how significantly he had misjudged the situation. Every time he glanced toward Chen, he was reminded that her composed professionalism masked operational experience that existed in realms he had never imagined. The Golden Dragon badge, which had sparked his investigation, now appeared to him as a symbol of service that commanded the highest respect rather than suspicion. During the morning break, Rodriguez made his decision. He approached Chen as she reviewed documents at her table, other officers milling around the room engaged in various conversations. "Lieutenant Chen," he began, his voice carrying a tone of respect that had been absent from their previous interactions. "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately." Chen looked up from her papers, studying his expression for a moment before nodding. "Of course, Captain." They found a quiet corner of the briefing room, away from the casual conversations of other officers. Rodriguez had spent considerable time the previous evening preparing for this conversation, but, faced with the moment, he found himself struggling to find appropriate words. "Lieutenant," he began, then paused, recognizing that his usual confident military bearing was insufficient for this situation. "I owe you a sincere apology." Chen's expression remained neutral, but Rodriguez detected a slight softening around her eyes. "Captain, you don't." "Yes, I do," Rodriguez interrupted gently. "I made assumptions about your service and qualifications based on my own limited knowledge, and I questioned your integrity without justification. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Chen was quiet for a moment, appearing to consider her response carefully. "Captain Rodriguez, I want you to know that I don't hold your investigation against you. In fact, I respect the fact that you care enough about military standards to ask difficult questions when something doesn't fit your understanding." Rodriguez felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease, but he knew his apology needed to be more complete. Lieutenant, I learned yesterday about Project Celestial Guardian and the Golden Dragon qualification. I understand now that when I questioned your badge, I was unknowingly challenging recognition for service that goes far beyond anything I've experienced. The briefing was informative? Chen asked with what Rodriguez thought might be the hint of a smile. Humbling would be a better word, Rodriguez replied. I spent 15 years believing I understood the full scope of military operations and capabilities. Yesterday I learned that my understanding was much more limited than I realized. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Captain, can I share something with you? When I first saw your interest in my badge, my initial reaction was defensive. Not because I was hiding anything inappropriate, but because I've become accustomed to operating in environments where few people understand the context of my service. Rodriguez listened intently as Chen continued. But, as we talked, I realized that your questions came from the same values that drive my own service: commitment to military integrity and professional standards. That's why I chose to facilitate your investigation rather than simply deflecting it. You could have avoided all of this, Rodriguez observed. I could have, Chen agreed, but I believe that truth serves everyone better than convenient evasions, even when the truth is complicated. Their conversation was interrupted by the call to reconvene the meeting, but Rodriguez felt that something significant had been resolved between them. As they returned to their seats, he reflected on how the past few days had changed his understanding not just of Lieutenant Chen's service, but of his own approach to evaluating fellow military personnel. The afternoon session proceeded normally, with various officers presenting updates on joint training exercises and operational coordination. However, Rodriguez found himself viewing the proceedings through a different lens. He began to notice subtle indicators he had previously missed: references to specialized units that weren't further explained, coordination requirements for non-standard operations, and personnel assignments that seemed to exist outside normal organizational structures. When the meeting concluded, Rodriguez lingered as officers filed out, hoping for another opportunity to speak with Chen. She seemed to anticipate his intention, gathering her materials slowly as the room gradually emptied. Lieutenant, Rodriguez said as they found themselves among the last personnel remaining, I hope you'll accept my invitation to join me for coffee sometime. I'd like to learn more about your perspective on joint operations coordination, if you're willing to share. Chen's smile was genuine this time. I'd be happy to, Captain. Though I should warn you that my perspective on military operations might be somewhat unconventional. I'm beginning to think that unconventional perspectives are exactly what I need to understand, Rodriguez replied. As they walked toward the exit together, Rodriguez reflected on how profoundly the past few days had changed his understanding of military service. His investigation into Lieutenant Chen's badge had begun with suspicious questioning of her credentials and had concluded with recognition that her qualifications far exceeded his own. Lieutenant, he said as they reached the parking area, can I ask you something? How do you handle the disconnect between what you've experienced and what most people understand about military service? Chen paused beside her vehicle, considering the question. It's challenging sometimes, she admitted. There are aspects of military service that most people never encounter, and it can be isolating to carry knowledge and experience that can't be shared normally. But I've found that focusing on the fundamental values, service, integrity, commitment, helps bridge those gaps. Rodriguez nodded, understanding her words on multiple levels. I think I'm just beginning to appreciate how much I don't know about the full scope of military capabilities and service opportunities. Captain, Chen said as she prepared to depart, the fact that you're willing to acknowledge that speaks well of your character. Many people would have doubled down on their initial assumptions rather than accepting new information. As Rodriguez drove home that evening, he found himself processing not just the resolution of his investigation, but its broader implications for his approach to military leadership. The encounter with Lieutenant Chen had revealed gaps in his knowledge that he hadn't known existed and had challenged assumptions about military service that he had carried throughout his career. His wife noticed the change in his demeanor immediately when he arrived home. How did your situation with the Air Force lieutenant resolve? Maria asked as they prepared dinner together. Rodriguez paused in his food preparation, still working through how to explain the past few days' revelations. I learned that my assumptions about her service were completely wrong, he said finally. Not just wrong, but wrong in ways that made me realize how much I don't understand about the full scope of military operations. That must have been difficult to accept, Maria observed. It was, Rodriguez admitted, but it was also educational in ways I didn't expect. I've been thinking about how often we make judgments based on incomplete information, especially about things we think we understand well. Over the following weeks, Rodriguez found himself approaching military interactions with increased humility and curiosity. His encounter with Lieutenant Chen had taught him that expertise in one area of military service didn't necessarily translate to understanding of all military capabilities and programs. The Golden Dragon Badge, which had initially appeared to Rodriguez as a suspicious decoration of questionable authenticity, had become a symbol of his own learning and growth. His investigation into its legitimacy had led him to discover not just the extraordinary service record it represented, but also the limitations of his own knowledge and assumptions. Months later, when Rodriguez encountered other military personnel wearing unfamiliar decorations or discussing capabilities outside his experience, he approached these situations with the curiosity and respect he had learned from his encounter with Lieutenant Chen. Rather than assuming his knowledge was comprehensive, he began each interaction with recognition that military service encompassed realms and experiences beyond any individual's complete understanding. The lesson proved invaluable in his subsequent assignments and leadership roles. Rodriguez's willingness to acknowledge the limitations of his knowledge and to approach unfamiliar situations with appropriate humility enhanced his effectiveness as a leader and earned him respect throughout the joint operations community. Lieutenant Chen's response to his initial suspicions, facilitating investigation rather than deflecting it, choosing truth over convenience, and addressing his concerns with professionalism rather than defensiveness, had provided Rodriguez with a model for handling challenging professional situations that he would carry throughout the remainder of his military career. The Golden Dragon Badge continued to remind Rodriguez that military service contained depths and complexities that no single person could fully comprehend, and that true professional competence required not just expertise in one's own area, but also respect for the knowledge and experience that others brought to military service. Rodriguez's investigation into Lieutenant Chen's badge had begun with his confidence in his ability to identify and verify military qualifications. It concluded with his recognition that wisdom often lay not in what one knew, but in understanding the vast scope of what one didn't know, and approaching that unknown territory with appropriate respect and humility.